Okay, we are going to learn how to add and subtract integers. An integer is any number that is positive or negative. So negative numbers are less than 1. You can have integers that are decimal or fraction numbers, but basically it's just positive and negative numbers. So anything to the right of 0 on the number line and anything to the left of 0 on the number line. So one thing you need to know about integers or negative numbers is that there is an absolute value. And so the absolute value of a number is the distance from 0 on a number line. So the absolute value of 3, written as these two lines next to 3, is 3, because 3 is 3 spaces away from 0 on a number line. And then the absolute value of its opposite, negative 3, is written as negative 3 inside the absolute value lines, or the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3 because it's 3 spaces away from the 0. So for example, if you have a number line that looks like this, and here's 0, and you have the absolute value of 3, it is 1, 2, 3 spaces away from the number line. And if you have the absolute value of negative 3, 1, 2, 3, this is negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, it is 1, 2, 3 spaces away from the number line. So one thing that's interesting that's probably not going to come up on here is if you have the negative of the absolute value. So for example, if I have the negative on the outside of the absolute value symbol, so the absolute value of 3 is 3, but then if you take the negative of that, it's the opposite, so it's negative 3. Or if you have the negative of the absolute value of negative 3, well, what's the absolute value of negative 3? 3. And what's the opposite of that? Negative 3. Okay. So let's keep going. You can also use what you know about absolute value to add integers. The sum of two integers, p plus q, is the number that is the absolute value of q units from p in a positive or negative direction, depending on the sign of q. So 5 plus negative 3 is 2, because on a number line, 2 is 3 units from 5 in the negative direction to the left. So what that means, what is that? 5 plus negative 3. So if I have a number line, and here is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So basically what they're saying is because on a number line, 2 is 3 units from 5 in the negative direction. So if I start at 5, and I'm going the negative direction, 1, 2, 3, I end up at 2, positive 2. Okay, so you can also use the rules to add integers. If the addends have the same sign, add the absolute value and give them the sum of that sign. So what that is saying is if the addends have the same sign, so if I have positive 2 plus positive 5, like this. So another way of saying that, because we normally don't even have those positive signs in front of them, it usually is just written like this. If there's no sign in front of it, you can assume it is positive. So if they have the same signs, you find the absolute value of them. So this is 2 and this is 5. It's 7. So it's a positive because they both have positive signs. So basically, when you have a positive plus a positive, you're obviously going to get a positive. Now, if they're both negative, so if I have negative 2 plus negative 5, it's going to give me negative 7. And why? Well, what's the absolute value of 2? Or negative 2, 2. What's the absolute value of negative 5? 5. So you combine those to get 7. They both are negative, so the rule is you're going to combine those and have a negative sign there. So it's a negative plus a negative gets you a negative. And if you were to work with a number line with this, basically what you would say, if here's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. If I start off at 2, positive 2, and I add 5. So here's 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I end up at 7, right? And then the same thing going the opposite way. Here's 0, here's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, and negative 7. If I start off at negative 2 and I add negative 5, I'm actually going this way because I'm adding a negative. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm here. Okay, so those are two of my really important rules when adding integers. A positive plus a positive is a positive. A negative plus a negative is a negative. If the add-ins have different signs, now this is tricky. You're actually subtracting the absolute values. You're actually just finding the difference between the numbers and then give the sum of the sign of the add-in with the greater absolute value. So what that means is you're just finding the difference between those two numbers, and then the greater number like wins the sign. So if you have negative 2 plus 5, so this is a positive 5, this is a negative 2. Find the difference between those two. So find the difference between the absolute values, ouch, which is 3. And because this 5 is greater and it's positive, your answer or your sum is a positive. But if you have the opposite, 2 plus a negative 5, you find the difference between those two numbers, the difference between the absolute values, so the difference between 2 and 5 is 3, but because 5 is greater and it's negative, negative wins the sign and is in the sum, like that. All right, so subtracting two integers is the same as adding the opposite or the additive inverse. The number being subtracted. So P minus Q is the same thing as saying P plus negative Q. So that's really important to know, because if you know these rules, all you have to do is kind of switch this and add the opposite, and that helps you figure it out. So let's really quickly go through that, subtracting. So obviously if you have like 5 minus 3, we know what that is. That's 2. But another way of saying that is 5 plus negative 3, which is also 2. So it's just another way of writing it. If you're adding the opposite of that. You're changing this to an addition sign and then adding a subtraction sign there. Another way of saying that is like if you have the opposite. So if you have like 3 minus 5. Another way, so this is going to be negative 2, right? So another way of saying this is 3 plus a negative 5, which equals negative 2, right? So another way of thinking about this is negative 3 minus negative 5. Or sorry, negative 3 minus 5. So another way of saying this is negative 3 plus negative 5. And so you just combine these two to get negative 8, okay? And then something that I don't think they have on here, and it's not gonna come up, is subtracting a negative. So this is where it gets a little tricky. So if I have like 3 minus a negative 5, and I don't think it's gonna come up on this lesson, but it is important to know. So when you're taking away a negative, you're actually adding a positive. It's like 2 negatives make a positive. So like it's the same thing as in like English class. If I say, don't not turn in your homework today, that means you better turn in your homework, right? So I'm like flipping it into a positive by giving you 2 negatives. So basically what happens here is this becomes 3, and like if you've got this, you change both these into positives, and that's an 8. So then if you had like negative 3 minus negative 5, these turn into positives, and then you just combine this negative 3 with this 5, so you just find the difference like we did when we added. So the difference between 3 and 5 is 2, and because this is higher, it's positive 2. So that's tricky, but if you know all of your adding negative numbers, then all you have to do is change the subtraction sign to an addition sign and then like add the opposite, and it makes it a little easier. So let's take a look at the examples they give us here. So -1 plus 4. The sum -1 plus 4 is the number that is the absolute value of 4 or 4 units from -1 in a positive direction. Because it's adding, you're adding a positive, you are going to the right. So if I start at -1 and I go 4 spaces, I'm at 3. Subtract -5 minus 8. So you are adding the opposite or the additive inverse of 8 to -5. So -5 minus 8 is -5 plus -8. And so the absolute value of -5 is 5, and the absolute value of -8 is 8. So 5 plus 8 is 13. However, because they're both negatives, you're going to get a negative 13, because a negative plus a negative is a negative. Write the subtraction expression 3 minus -2 as an addition expression. Explain your reasoning. So this is kind of what we just went over. So because I'm taking away a negative, I'm actually going to be adding that. So for example, if I had $3 in my bank account and I owed $2, but I took away that debt, I'm actually adding that $2 on. So this is like saying 3 plus 2, which equals 5. So you're taking away a negative, which means you add. So it's like 2 negatives make a positive. All right, let's keep going. Add 3 plus -8. Find the absolute value of -8, which is 8. Use a number line to find the sum. The sum, 3 plus -8 is the number that is the absolute value of -8, or 8 units from the 3 in the negative direction. So if I start off at the 3 here and I go 8 places to the left, because it's negative, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's -5. So basically just find the difference between 3 and 8, and because 8 is larger, it wins the sign. Jen has overdraft privileges at her bank. That means she can take out more than she has in her bank account as like a protection thing. So like if you have a certain amount of money in your checking account, like she has $60 in her checking account and she takes out 90, she has like a protection there that she's not going to get charged for like taking out more than she has in. The bank just trusts that she's going to pay that back eventually. So it says write an expression to represent the problem situation. So she has a positive 60 and she's taken away 90. So rewrite the subtraction expression as an addition subtraction. So 60 minus 90 is just like saying 60 plus -90. Subtract the absolute values. So 60, the absolute value of 60 is 60. The absolute value of -90 is 90. So 90 minus 60 is 30. But you give the answer the sign of the greater absolute value, which is this right here. And so 90 has the greater, or -90 has the greater absolute value. So the answer is -30. So in her checking account, she has -30. So that absolute value stuff kind of messes me up. So if I were to look at this equation, 60 minus 90, and rewrite it as 60 plus a -90, I just think, well, what's the difference between those two numbers? 30, 90 is greater, so it like wins the sign of the sum. All right, what is absolute value? The number of places from 0. Does a whole number n have the same absolute value as its opposite n? Yes, it does. So the absolute value of n equals n, and the absolute value of -n equals n, because it's just the same amount of places from the zero, either whether it's from on the left side of the zero or on the right side, it's still like the same number of places. It's the same absolute value. Now, n does not equal negative n, but the absolute value does because it's the same places away. All right, so you are gonna go ahead and use your number lines to do this. So find the number of places away they are, doing these simple expressions. So like obviously this one's pretty simple, positive 1 plus positive 2. So you start at 1 and you go 2 places and you're at 3. And then 4 plus negative 2. So start at 4 and you're adding on a negative. So you're gonna go to the left because it's a negative sign. So 1, 2, and you're at 2. Another way of thinking of that is you should find the difference between 4 and 2. Because 4 is higher, it wins the sign of the sum. And then this one, negative 1 plus negative 4. So because it's a negative, you're going to the left. You're adding on a negative. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're at negative 5. Or you're just combining those two numbers, 1 plus 4, because they're both negative, your answer gets a negative sign. And then this next one, negative 4 plus 3, start at negative 4. You're adding on 3, so you're going to the right. 1, 2, 3, and you're at negative 1. Another way of thinking about that is you just find the difference between 4 and 3, which is 1, and because 4 is higher, it wins the sign. So go ahead and give these a shot. If you come across anything that confuses you, shoot me an email or Google chat, and I can go over it with you either on Zoom or make a quick video for you. And then complete these also. The next lesson is multiply and divide integers. Now, this is actually so much easier than adding and subtracting because there's just 3 simple rules that you need to remember to do this. It's kind of like when you are adding and subtracting fractions, and you have to find common denominators and change everything, and it's a lot more complicated. And then when you multiply and divide, you just do it across, which is so much easier. So to multiply 2 integers, you drop the signs and multiply as if they were whole numbers. If the integers have the same sign, the product is positive. If the integers have opposite signs, the product is negative. So basically, if you have 2 times 3, you're gonna get 6, right? So another way of saying this is 2 taken 3 times. 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6. These are all positive numbers. Positive 2 plus positive 2 plus positive 2 equals 6. So a positive times a positive gets a positive, right? Put that there. So then if you have negatives, so if the 2 signs are the same, so if you have negative 2 times negative 3, that also equals a positive. So a negative times a negative equals a positive. And let me show you why. So another way of saying this is to negative 2 taken a negative amount of time. So basically you have negative 2, negative 2, negative 2, right? But if I take that a negative amount of times, those 2 negatives do what? Turn into positive. So I have 6, right? So these are 2 important rules to remember. 2 positives makes a positive, and 2 negatives make a positive. So a positive times a positive is a positive, a negative times a negative is a positive. And then if the next rule, which I'm sure they're gonna say right here, if the 2 integers have opposite signs, the product is negative. So what that means is if I have negative 2 times 3, that equals negative 6. So a negative times a positive equals a negative. Okay? And what that means is, again, this is negative 2 taken 3 times. So it's negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2, which equals negative 6, right? And then because of the commutative property, I can flip those that negative around and I'm still gonna get a -6. So like if I did +2 times -3, basically what's that saying is +2, +2, +2, right? But you're taking that or subtracting that. So it's taking it a negative time. So you're like basically like adding a negative again, or like just taking away 2 3 times, which is -6. So a positive times a negative gets you also a negative. So just basically 3 rules to remember, right? Positive plus positive times a positive is a positive, negative times a negative is a positive, and then if the signs are opposite, you're always gonna get a negative. And then division is the same. So when you're dividing integers, it's the same rules as these. So if I have 6 divided by 3, I get 2. So a positive divided by a positive gets a positive. And then if you have a -6 divided by a -3, you're going to get a positive also. So a negative divided by a negative gets a positive. So it's the same rules as these. And then dividing a negative by a positive gets you a negative. Same rule as this. A negative divided by a positive gets you a negative. And then the same thing on reverse. So a positive divided by a negative gets a negative. Like that. So these rules are pretty simple. If you remember the 3, you won't have a problem. So let's see what their examples are. The same properties that can be applied to whole number multiplication can also be applied to integer multiplication. For example, the distributive property can be applied to integers a, b, and c. So a times the sum of b and c, you're pulling that through, right? So a times b plus a times c. And then the same thing goes with negative. So, or when there's a subtraction sign there. So I would pull this positive a times the positive b, which would be ab, and then the positive a times a negative c. So this is just, this, you can just say like this would be like plus a negative or just minus c. So then that negative sign stays there. So it would be positive times a negative, which would get you a negative. So let's take a look at this. So -32 divided by -4. Drop the signs, divide as you would whole numbers. Well, that's 8. Give the quotient the correct sign. So -32 and -4 have the same sign, so the quotient is positive. So two negatives make a positive. The value of a stock drops 4 points each day for 5 straight days. What is the net change in the value of the stock? So it's like the total change. Net means total. Represent the daily change in value as an integer. The drop in value of 4 points is -4. Multiply the daily change by the number of days. Since the signs are different, the product will be negative. So this is how many points it drops, and this is how many days. So this is how many points it's dropped over 40 or over 4 days. Or it's negative, the net, net change. So like what it's changed is -20 points because you're taking -4 times 5. I like that question. All right, find the quotient. So this is written as a fraction, which we know that when a number is a fraction, it's actually a fancy way of writing a division problem, isn't it? So this is -25ths. So it doesn't matter where that negative sign is when there's only one of them. I can put it in the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter. If it's in front of it, it can go right there. Now, if you did have like -20 over -5, that would be a different problem. But right now, we just have one negative. So we're just gonna put it with the -20 over 5, so it's -20 divided by 5, which equals, just pretend like they're whole numbers, it's 4, but because there is a negative, it gets a -4. The quotient will be negative. All right, use the distributive property to write the additive inverse of 6 plus x without parentheses. Identify the additive inverse. So the additive inverse of 6 plus x is negative 6 plus x. And then you're going to pull that negative through to both those numbers. So I'm going to pretend like that negative is a negative 1 just to make my multiplication easier. So negative 1 times 6 plus negative 1 times x. So negative 1 plus, or negative 1 times 6 plus negative 1 times x equals negative 6 plus negative x equals negative 6 minus x. So the additive inverse, so the opposite of 6 plus x is negative 6 minus x. So this may look a little confusing. So we have negative 6 plus negative x. Well, it's just a simplified version of adding a negative is just subtracting a positive, right? Oops, you can't see that. Subtracting a positive down there. All right, what is the distributive property of addition over multiplication for integers? The distributive property of addition over multiplication for integers. What does that mean? Distributive property can apply, oh, okay. So basically it's what we just did over there. If we have A times B plus C, this can go in between, or just be multiplied by those. So A, B plus A, C. So what is the distributive property of addition over multiplication for integers? So you just distribute the number on the outside to the numbers on the inside of the addition problem. How do you determine which sign to give the quotient of two integers? So quotient means division. So you know that positive divided by a positive equals a positive. A negative divided by a negative equals a positive. And if signs are opposite, it is a negative. All right, so if you follow those rules, this should be pretty simple. I'll do a couple of these, and then I'm gonna let you do the rest of these on your own. If you've got any questions, just Google chat me or email me, and I can do a quick video or just help you answer your question, or help answer your question. So obviously this is two positives, so the answer is positive. This is two negatives, so the answer is a positive. This is a positive and a negative, so it's a negative answer. And this is a negative and a positive, so it's a negative answer. So these should be pretty simple. Go ahead and complete the rest of these. And then the last thing we're gonna work on is simplifying and solving for the variable using some of these same skills. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of these with you and hopefully go over all the different steps that you need in order to understand how to do this. This is using those inverse operations, solving for the variable, but then also using adding and subtracting integers. So let's try this one. So we have 8 times the sum of negative 5 plus 4n plus 2n. So we're also going to be combining like terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute this 8 to this sum on the inside. So 8 times negative 5 is negative 40. And then 8 times 4n, I'm going to put an equal sign underneath here because I'm going to write everything down underneath it. Or I don't even really need that equal sign because I have an equal sign over here. But 8 times 4n, and that's a positive 4n, so I complete that addition sign there. So 8 times 4 is 32, don't forget the n, plus 2n equals 28. Now, this I can combine two of the terms. I can combine these two because they have the same variable. So I'm going to just write everything down underneath it that I'm not solving for. So 32 plus 2n, or 32n plus 2n is 34n equals 28. Now, I need to get rid of this first. You always want to get rid of the one that doesn't have a variable first. before you worry about solving for the variable. So because this is a negative 40, I need to do the inverse operation and add 40 to it. If I do it to this side, I have to do it to this side. And now I have 34n equals 68. Okay, now I'm still not done. I need to figure out what n is. Because this is multiplication, I'm going to divide it because I want to make it 1. So 34 divided by 34, and then I have to do it to this side. And so n equals 68 divided by 34, I think is 2. So your final answer is n equals 2. All right, let's do this one right here. So this is 9m minus m equals 24. All right, so what we can do is we can combine those two terms, these two m's. So really what this is saying is 9m minus 1m. And so what's 9 minus 1? It's 8m equals 24. Then you divide this by 8, divide this by 8, and m equals 3. All right, let me find one with a negative in there. We did the distributive. Let's do this one right here together, number 8. So we have 8 plus 2y plus 3 equals negative 11. So the first thing I'm going to do is combine these two terms. So 8 plus 3 equals 11 plus 2y equals negative 11. So now I need to get rid of this. So I'm going to subtract 11 and get 0. I subtract 11 from here. Now I'm kind of like negative 11 minus 11 is just like saying negative 11. So this is what it looks like, right? So that's just like saying plus a negative. So if you combine negative 11 plus negative 11, I get negative 22, right? So now in my equation, it says 2y equals negative 22. I divide this 2 by this 2 to get that y by itself. Now I divide this by this 2. Now my final answer is y equals, well, what's 22 divided by 2? 11. But this one up here has a negative. So my answer is going to have a negative. So my answer is also negative 11. So that's kind of fun. That was negative 11, and this is negative 11. So if you were to plug negative 11 in there, would you get a true statement? So I'm going to basically take what I saw for this negative 11, and stick it in here and see if they are equal to each other. So I've got 8 plus 2y, and the y is negative 11, plus 3 equals negative 11. Let's see if that's true. So this is 8 plus, and then 2 times negative 11 is negative 22, plus 3 equals negative 11. So now I'm going to combine these two because they're like symbols, and that's just easier for me. Or you could just go straight down here. So you could do negative, or 8 plus negative 11 is, or plus negative 22. So you just find the difference between those. So 22 minus 8 is, oh my gosh, 16. Negative 16, and then plus 3. That doesn't work. 8, so I'm going to combine these two. That's 11. Oh, yeah, it does work. So I'm just going to combine these two because it's easier for me. So 8 plus 3 is 11, plus negative 22 equals negative 11. So what's 11 plus negative 22? You just find the difference between 11 and 22 is 11, but this wins the sign, so negative 11 equals negative 11. So it is true. And then I want to do this one down here with you. So I'm just going to simplify this equation by distributing this through. So I'm going to write everything down that I'm not working on. So I'm going to copy this down and this. So 9x plus, then I'm going to distribute this negative 7 times positive 7 times negative 2. So that's plus a negative 14. I'm going to put parentheses around there so I can see it's a negative. And then this positive 7 times negative 6. So I'm also going to put a plus sign here just because I like to, it's easier for me to add everything. But this term's going to get a negative x, something negative x. So 7 times 6 is negative 42x equals 85. All right, now I can combine these two together. So this is positive 9x and negative 42x. So I find the difference between 42 and 9 and get, what is that? 33. So that's a negative 33x, right? Because this wins the sign. And then this is plus negative 14 equals 85. All right, so I need to get rid of this first. So I add 45, add 45. I don't remember doing this. I don't think this is gonna be right. Oh wait, sorry, not 45, 14, add 14. And then this is 99. This crossed itself out, and so I have this still. Negative 33x equals 99. Divide this by negative 33. Divide this by negative 33. And my answer is 99 divided by negative 33. So x equals negative 3. So then if I plug that number in, I should get 85 on this side and 85 on this side. So let's do that just to make sure I am right. So my equation is 9x plus 7, negative 2, negative 6 equals 85. And my answer is negative 3. All right, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to put negative 3 everywhere I see an x. So 9 times negative 3 plus 7, 6, negative 3 equals 85. All right, then I'll simplify my equation. So this is negative 27 plus negative 14 plus, and then negative 6 times negative 3 is a positive 18 equals 85. And then I can combine these. So I think this doesn't look like it's gonna work. That doesn't seem like it's true. Did I do it right? Negative 3, negative 3, positive, negative 14, negative. All right, let's just see. Doesn't look like it's going to equal this. I must have done something wrong. All right, so these two together, this is, carry the 1, negative 41 plus 18 does not equal 85. So I must have done something wrong. Negative 3, maybe it's, all right, I'll take a look at that one again and shoot you an email on how I fixed it. So I do have the answers to these written down. Hopefully I didn't screw up a lot more of them. Do your best on these. If any of them become too difficult and you can't get it, obviously you try it again. If you still can't get it, shoot me an email and I'll work it out and see if I can come up with a solution. You do have this page to complete and also these. You obviously don't need to do all of them, but if you would like to, you can.